Back in the 60s and even into the 70s, a typical studio mic setup for drums might only include 2 to 4 microphones, a pair of condensers, and then if you're lucky, maybe a kick and maybe a snare mic. In this course, I will demonstrate how to record drums with just 4 microphones in a later video, but for the majority of this course, I'll be focusing on modern drum recordings. So typically, I end up using anywhere from 12 to 14 microphones for a full drum kit. So I typically use a kick-in mic to pick up the punch from the kick drum. This is almost always a large diaphragm dynamic mic. A kick-out mic to pick up the tone and mid-range body of the kick. This can either be a large diaphragm condenser or a dynamic mic. A snare top mic to pick up the punch of the snare. This will typically be a cardioid dynamic mic like an SM57 or an SM7B. But I'll do a mic shootout with 5 different snare top mics in a later video. I'll also use a snare side or snare bottom mic. Now, if I'm using a bottom mic, I usually just use another dynamic mic, but if I'm using a side mic, I'll use a large diaphragm condenser. This is a great way to pick up the high-end air from the snare like you get from ghost notes and softer playing, but it also helps to reinforce the body and punch of the snare as well. For toms, I typically use cardioid dynamics. Here, there's some options like the Sennheiser E604 and E904 that clip onto the rim of the tom if a full-size mic and a stand is getting in the way of the cymbals. However, my favorite tom mic is the Sennheiser MD421. The hi-hat gets its own mic. You can actually use a dynamic or a small or large diaphragm condenser for this. I use this mic to just accent the hi-hat when needed. Often the overheads will pick up enough of the hi-hat already, and I only use the hi-hat mic at certain points to bring it up in the mix. The overheads are a stereo pair. I typically use one of 3 methods for overheads: a spaced pair for a wide stereo image, an XY technique for a tighter sound and a more narrow image, or a variation on the Glenn Johns method that picks up the whole kit. It's slightly less wide, but it's still technically a spaced pair, but the way I position the mics keeps the snare in the center and really helps to reduce phase issues. And lastly, I typically use a stereo pair of condensers or ribbon mics to pick up the room. So that's an overview of my typical 12-channel setup for modern drum recording. Later on in this course, I'll show you several different techniques and variations for each mic on the kit.